Hey, everybody. This is your host, Nevin Gusak of the Politically Homeless podcast. I wanted to do two live streams. This one, I'm going to be doing some reflections on my interview with the U.S. Senate candidate, John Columbus, who graciously agreed to come on the program. John Columbus is one of a couple of contenders who is vying for the seat of current U.S. Senate U.S. Senator and incumbent Rick Scott, who was formerly the governor of Florida, which is the state that I live in. How I came about John Columbus was quite simple. I was looking at my ballot and I wanted to see who was running against Rick Scott because I am a registered Republican. And I was researching the different candidates and I looked at John Columbus and I looked at his website and I liked the tenor of some of his ideas. I never voted for Rick Scott. I really did not care for him as governor in many ways, particularly on the economics and the education. He had joined in 2012. He was one of the participants in the summit in 2012 held in Texas to garner communist Chinese investment in the state of Florida, and for that matter, the United States of America. And that was actually a staunch anti-communist conservative called my attention to that. So that was strike number one. Strike number two, there was a conservative candidate for the Florida State Senate who I supported, and he was an independent thinker in many ways, was a retired U.S. Marine Corps veteran in the Vietnam War. And he supported Rick Scott initially when he was running for governor. And Rick Scott and him had a conversation about the FCAT, which is the high stakes test that used to exist in Florida. And that was something that Governor Jeb Bush really put into effect. And Governor Jeb Bush and his allies have a very strong imprint on educational policy in Florida, as well as even in the rest of the Republican Party throughout the country. So, unfortunately, Rick Scott did not abolish the FCAT, even though parents, teachers, students absolutely hate it down here. And it really was not an effective tool to really gauge how well students will do ultimately in college and universities as well as the real world. So I really did not like Rick Scott. I have heard people who have met him who are even independent-minded conservatives rather than sort of Republican Party liner types. And they did not particularly have a good vibe about him. And these are people that I trusted. So I decided not to vote for Scott. I voted for third parties. And moving forward, so I came across John Columbus. He has a website, John Columbus for Congress. And he's a heterodox Republican. He has some views that are very progressive that I know that people on the channel who tune into some of my more conservative or right-wing guests, they might strongly disagree with what he has to say, and that's okay. But I like the fact that he was heterodox. He expresses his disenchantment with politics here in Florida as well as the country. Being very akin to what Mike Lofgren, who was a former Republican congressional aide, referred to as an Army-Navy football game or a circus maximus, or I call a circus of distraction. And he really carries that tone where he attacks both sides, moderately progressive as well as also conservative. So he is very much an environmentalist and an advocate of alternative energy. But as I kind of cut into the program, he's also a pragmatist. And I wanted people to realize that because he's not saying, let's just get rid of fossil fuels tomorrow. He understands it's going to play a role, but he also understands it's not going to last forever. And there needs to be environmentally more friendly alternatives to the fossil fuels when that time comes up. He is also for capitalism, but he also is against the corporate price gouging and also the governor and the legislators' legislation to not allow the various local municipal governments to enact heat and water break ordinances for workers who work outdoors, as well as also quite a bit of corporate price gouging. On national defense and foreign policy, Mr. Columbus also feels that we should be defending our allies too as well. So, he had a lot of these heterodox views. He's not open borders. He's not xenophobic. One of the concerns he expresses is how Senator Rick Scott voted against a border bill that was in the Congress, but the Republicans, as he talked about, did not want to vote for it because each side, whether Democrat or Republican, they want to own each other rather than look at the policy as it exists and move forward for what he feels is best for the country. And one of the things that really frustrates me about politics, whether conservative, Republican, so to speak, or Democrat, is that it's all about owning the other side, as he put it. And that way of looking at policy and politics is very akin to mine. If Trump is right about certain things, I will support Trump on that particular issue. If Biden is correct on this particular issue, I will support Biden based on my principles of radical civic nationalism. So that really resonated very much with me, John Columbus. And I've worked on Republican campaigns, and I've met a number of good Republicans. They're very good people. I like them personally. But there are also malevolent forces in both party establishments down here in South Florida. This was years ago. Maybe it's changed. Where if they didn't like a candidate, or they felt they were a threat for some reason or another, or they had a preferred candidate, they basically treated them very poorly and didn't give them an opportunity to speak. That happened in one Republican club in Palm Beach County, where you had Ellen Bogdanoff, who was the incumbent state senator, faced a primary challenge from Mike Lemire, who's a Marine Corps veteran and Vietnam, and he had very strong anti-illegal or undocumented immigrant stance. He also broke with the Republican Party orthodoxy on the issue of high-stakes testing, and also on national issues. I mean, he was not a free trader. He was staunchly anti-communist. So he broke with the GOP on certain critical issues, and they didn't like that. And the donors, the wealthy donors, preferred Mike's opponent, Ellen Bogdanoff, who never met a lobbyist she didn't like. Very experienced legislator for sure. And I believe that everybody should have a chance to speak, whether you like them personally, whether you like them professionally or their platform or not. When you're dealing with an internal political party democracy or freedom, you have to give everyone a fair shake to state their arguments and let the best man or woman win. Because it's all about talent. It's all about ethics. It's all about what your program is and the depth of your arguments. And is something constitutional? Is it going to enhance our country's national security or the shared but earned prosperity of the people? And I saw that in the Democratic side. I really mostly was a registered Republican for most of my life. Sometimes I would switch to vote in Democratic primaries. But when I look at the situation, I worked because I agreed with him on certain principles like money in politics and free trade issue and financial regulation. And that was Tim Canova, who ran twice in the Democratic primary against the incumbent Congresswoman Debbie Wasserman Schultz, who's very powerful in the state and in the National Democratic Party. And of course, if from Mr. Canova's perspective, Congresswoman Wasserman Schultz and the Democratic clubs that were kind of under her strong influence were not particularly always nice to him either. So it occurs in both parties, this type of authoritarianism that they already have their preferred candidates, and we're just going to shut down debate because we made up on our own minds. And that's, my interview with and discussion even before the show with Mr. Columbus um, really was indicative of really the importance of opening up the debate and the discussion to outside voices and to give people the truth. And it really reminded me of some of the memories I had working and volunteering on a small level with different candidates on all sides of the spectrum, but who agreed with me on some issue or another that was very near and dear to me. I like the fact that in a way that he's a family person too. He obviously is taking care of his mom. We started at about 11ish, but we had a lot of technical difficulties. So the computers froze up, and unfortunately, I had to cut the first version of the interview out. So he graciously agreed to do a shorter version of the interview. And obviously we had to cut it short because, as he said on the program, he had to take care of his mother. And that resonates well because it shows that he's a good person, that he loves his parents, and that he's very caring and very responsible and very family oriented. And that resonates very well with me too, and should resonate with the voters as well. So I just wanted to pop up on here. Look, there are things I'm not going to agree with him on. The marijuana issue, I am for medical marijuana, but full legalization, I really do not support that, but that's okay. I'm not going to agree with everyone 100% of the time. There are things I don't agree with all of my guests that I've had on this program, for example. I don't 100% agree with everyone 100% of the time. That's just reality. So I looked at that. I like the fact that sometimes he doesn't look at issues as black and white, for or against. He rather likes to get into the root cause, like with abortion, and how could we reduce or eliminate abortion by incentivizing people to have families and have children. So I appreciated that. So he's a very unorthodox, heterodox Republican candidate. I really appreciate him. For those of you in Florida or even outside of Florida, definitely give him a look. He's very responsive, and all of his responses on social media that I've seen so far have been very friendly, very respectful. He's not rude or obnoxious, and I had a good feel about him. And we need more genuinely good people who are authentic, and that's what I appreciate about him. Seems like a very authentic gentleman, and for that reason, I was very pleased with my interview. I wish it was longer. I'm sure we may have interviews in the future, especially if he does win the primary. I can guarantee with outliers who are primary people, he's probably going to get a couple of thousand votes. So maybe he can start some sort of political advocacy group, with a core group of supporters. Maybe he could reach out to them on social media, because by God, the political establishments and the sort of Tea Party, DeSantis, Jeb Bush type Republican Party that's dominated by wealthy special interests, as well as the Democrats, where you do have a DSA, Democratic Socialists of America extreme, coming from the left in certain circles, which I don't agree with. And then the sort of corporate wing of the party is represented by, politicians and elected officials like Congresswoman Debbie Wasserman Schultz. There needs to be sort of, I would argue, in the Democratic Party, a Scoop Jackson-oriented Democratic Party. And then on foreign policy, combine maybe the domestic agenda of the American School of Economics of Abraham Lincoln, combine that with maybe some of Eisenhower's domestic platform, and combine it with the strong anti-communism of, for example, like the late U.S. Senator Jesse Helms of North Carolina, who was always skeptical of our enemies, including Russia, as well as also China. So I end on this note. I see a couple of people who are listening. One like, thank you very much. I really appreciate it. I'm going to go on and do another live stream in just a moment on an entirely different subject.